In this movie, we're going to take a look at a couple of the other features that we've yet to discuss in the new release of Cinema 4D R17. Now, I picked 4 or 5 of my favorite new options, and I'm going to pack them all into one scene here for you. So the first thing that I want to talk about is what exactly are we looking at? So I've built a tile floor that I kind of added some randomness to it, and I did that using MoGraph, but then I collapsed it all down and just baked it all down to the geometry. So if we open up the tile floor null, you'll see a whole bunch of cubes going on inside of this. There could be a million reasons that we decided to do this. Maybe with the cloners, you decided that you needed a bit more art directable, so you wanted to bake everything down. This way you have access to the individual pieces and move them around. And yes, we can do that with MoGraph selections and all that kind of stuff, but sometimes this is a little easier. Maybe you wanted to do it that way. Maybe you wanted to do it because the performance with the scene baked down as opposed to the cloners is maybe going to move a little faster in your viewport. There's a ton of reasons that you may want to do this. So now the next step would be, well, what if we wanted to have a different shader applied to each of these? And I shouldn't say a completely different shader, just like a variation of one shader. Well, that's where the variation shader comes into play. So let's take a look at how we're going to do that. I'm going to make a new material just by double clicking, and we'll call this tile floor. Then we're going to go ahead and click and drag that on top of the null that's holding all these together. And we can close this up. We don't need it anymore. We're going to open up this material by double clicking on it, pulling this out of the way. And in the color tab, we're going to go to texture, we're going to go to effects, and go down to variation. Let's do a quick render and see what we got going on there. Whoa, that's not what we had in mind, right? So let's take a look at how we're going to make this look a little bit more like a tile floor. Let's click on the variation shader. That'll open up the options and the attributes for that. This we're going to close just for now and take a look at some of the other options. So let's start from the top and work our way down. What do we want our base texture to be? Well, this is going to be our base color. Now, it could be a texture, but let's just make things simple and we'll just pick a color. So let's go in here. We're going to go to color. We're going to click on the color. So this is one of the other things I want to talk about, which is new in R17, is this cool new color picker. Before we had, our RGB sliders, we could do that. Now we actually can open up this, which is going to be a wheel. We have our spectrum, and we have the color from picture if we want to sample from a picture. So this is just more options, and hopefully you find it easier to pick the exact color that you're looking for. It's just different ways of accessing the same colors. So if I click on color wheel, see now I can actually click and drag around, and I'm changing the saturation. If I pull away from the center, I'm changing the saturation as I'm rotating around and adjusting the hue as well. So I can come over here, change the value over here, bunch of different ways. So I'm just going to go with like a grayish kind of color for our base color. So now you can see everything looks a little bit darker. And that's because we're using the gradient on top of our base color. So for the secondary texture, let's just go in and add some noise. Not a gradient. Try again. Let's grab noise. And we'll change that to like the booyah. And then we'll also come down to the contrast, and we'll just kind of increase that a little bit. So there we go. I have something looking like that. Great. Just to give some breakup to what I imagine the tile texture to look and feel like. So now what we're going to go do is we're going to turn down the random color all the way to 0. And for the gradient, we want 100% of whatever the gradient colors here are set to. So now let's just change the colors of the gradient. So let's open that up, and we can actually come down and load some presets, which is really cool. So I'm going to go grab maybe something like this. So we'll add those on there. Now, since I already have a gray color as my base, I'm just going to double click on these knots, actually single click and just drag them out of the way, and we'll pull out these white ones. If I right click on the gradient now, I can distribute them evenly. And let's get rid of this one that looks a little too much like the other one. And we'll redistribute. So now if we render, let's take a look and see what's going on. How cool is that? So we are able to just use, if I pull this down here so you can see everything. Let's take a look again. We have our gray base color. We're adding some noise to that. And then we're using just these colors from our gradient. And then we're using 100% the blend. So it's just going to be grabbing from the gradient. Now, if we take the random color and crank that up to 100%, now we're going to get randomness on top of that. Let's take that back down to 0. So this is a really cool way of adding variation to a bunch of different objects without needing MoGraph. So now if we go up and turn the interactive render region on, this way we can kind of see what's going on. If we scroll down here and take the contrast up to like 50%, now we've just adjusted the contrast. Or I should say, we're varying the contrast. We can have a variation on the gamma, right? The gamma is the midtones of the color. So it's not the real dark stuff, not the real bright stuff, all the midtones. We can adjust the hue. We can adjust the saturation. We can adjust the lightness, all this kind of stuff. So it really functions like a random effector, but without having the need for MoGraph. Super cool stuff. So let's take this back down over here. Pull this over here, get this back down to, and let's just take this blue out just for, there we go. So a very funky looking tile floor. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off the interactive render region and show you two other really cool things that I use all the time in R17. Okay, the first one, let's say we are zooming into this area here in the middle, okay? This is probably something you do all the time. And you get this really cool view. You're like, you know what? I kind of want to see like under this or on the side of it or just kind of tumble left and right. Well, if I wanted to do that, I'd have to go over here and then kind of flip and, look underneath this and do all this. It's fine and that works, but it's kind of a pain if you've already set up your view. So what you can do now is actually if you hold down the control key as you're tumbling, now you can just kind of rotate the whole thing. Check that out and kind of peek underneath, peek back this way. All right, let's go over here and do the same thing. Peek under this way. So really cool, different ways that you can get in there and rotate to look under something. Really, really cool. Now, the problem with that is sometimes you could get a little too crazy with it. Let me get out of the camera mode here. Get out of this camera. So kind of look this way, look on the front. You can get kind of crazy with it and get yourself all out of whack. And it's pretty easy to fix this. All you need to do is instead of holding down Control when you're tumbling around, just hold Shift in addition to your tumble tool, either if you're using the Option key or if you're using the 1, 2, 3 keys. And when you add Shift, it snaps you right back to the regular view, to your regular rotation, the regular bank of the camera. So again, if you're in on a spot and you want to kind of tumble around, hold down the Control key. You can tumble this way now. And if you want to get out of that, just hold Shift and it'll snap you right back. Now I'm going to go back to the camera mode for the last thing I want to show you here. And let's get back to a good spot here in our camera. And those are two animation controls. So let's hit play and see what's going on here. Okay, so nothing too crazy. I have the camera parented to a null and the null has a 360-degree rotation on it. So let's just pause this, go up to Window, and open our timeline. So now I have the dope sheet open. Now in previous versions, if I hit the space bar, that would toggle back and forth between the dope sheet and the F curve. But now that key has been moved to the tab key. Let's make this a little bit smaller. Move it out of the way. That's because now, instead of having to grab your mouse and go back to the play button or hit a different hotkey, just make sure the timeline's active. Now you can just hit spacebar, start and stop, tab to go back and forth. Let's grab the null. All right, so if I wanted to make adjustments to this, let's say I wanted to just go in and, adjust this curve, adjust this, spacebar will now do that pretty quick. Okay. So that looks pretty cool. Hit the tab key, hit my dope sheet, move this stuff up, check that out. All right, so spacebar is now a start and stop, and tab will flip back and forth between the F curve and the dope sheet. So those are some of my personal favorite pieces of R17, and then those don't get a whole lot of love or a whole lot of attention. So I thought we would have a movie here just to kind of focus on some of those. And I hope you find those as useful as I do.